if you don't enjoy at least 80% of what you're doing, you need to find something else. I was a youth pastor. I felt really stressed out. And I vividly remember walking out in the hall and calling my wife and just saying like, I think we need to leave. Who you are is more important than what you do. And so if we are great at the craft and the skills of these other things, but we drop the ball at home with the people that matter most to us, like we're doing it wrong.
What's your advice to your younger self?
Put in the work, do the right things, the things that you're supposed to do, like be a person of character and integrity, like make good decisions, and like things tend to work out well.
So what are some practical steps somebody can take if they want to be better at communicating?
A couple things. One is like,
Grant Baldwin, welcome to the show, man.
good to be here, buddy. Thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Dude, I can't wait to get into this because there's a lot of things I want to drill from you. Is that a phrase? Drill from you? It is now.
You're going to drill it into me?
I'm going to drill from you into me.
What are we getting ourselves into here? That's not what I signed up for.
It's going to be a great show. So I know you. I've known you for years. I know you.
How did we first connect? Did we first connect at FinCon?
Must have been at FinCon.
We were just discussing this.
Yeah, you were a keynote one year.
Well, yes, but I also
a big
feel
deal.
like maybe... I don't know. Like, I think we just had some mutual friends. I think you were doing Bigger Pockets at the time.
Yep.
It wasn't what it, as big as it blew up to be.
It blew up.
But yeah, I remember like we talked a little bit about real estate stuff. I didn't know squat about it. Still don't know squat about it. But and then it was just kept in touch over the years.
Yeah.
And so we tried to record this in Maui.
Yes.
That would be much warmer
Yes.
than where we are currently.
It's so cold right now.
But it's okay. That's fine. Neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But here we are.
It's probably 40 degrees in this room.
It's a little frigid, but that's okay.
Cold. We have those little warmer packets on all over our bodies.
We have a lot of warmer packets happening.
There's like this blizzard in Nashville. It's nuts. All right, man. So I know you as an entrepreneur, as the founder of the Speaker Lab. I know you've helped thousands of people learn how to get paid to speak, to get booked for speaking gigs. I know you as a father of 3 girls.
True. Yeah.
I know you as the husband of 1. Just one?
That's correct.
Just one still. Good job.
Yes. I'm gonna keep it that way.
I just found out you're a pilot.
Yes.
Which is super cool. I want to talk about that later. A little bit about you getting your license there. But take us back before that. That's who is Grant. Who was Grant Baldwin?
Yeah, so especially in the speaking space, like growing up in high school, I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor had a big impact on my life. Okay. And I was like, I want to do that. Like that seemed like a really cool gig. And so that was kind of the path I was on. And I kind of felt like if I could make the kind of impact and difference in others' lives that he made in my life, like that just seemed super rewarding and fulfilling. And so I went to Bible college, and even in college, I worked for a guy who was a full-time speaker and kind of got to see a little bit behind the scenes of what's it like to be a speaker? So that kind of got the wheels spinning a little bit. And then I was a youth pastor at a different local church for a little while, and that gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. And speaking was one of those things I felt like I was decent at. I wanted to do more of. And so it was on my radar. I would speak every so often, like on the weekend in big church. And I was like, this is kind of fun. I feel like I get good feedback. Would love to do more of this. And so my wife was pregnant with our first child. And as you well know, there's nothing like bringing a kid into the world that causes you to question everything. And like, what am I doing with my life? And so felt like I was having like this quarter life crisis of like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And so I left that position as a youth pastor. And for the next like 6 to 9 to 12 months or something, just kind of like aimlessly trying to figure out like what do I want to do now? Is this what I want to do? Is this what I went to college for this? Is this ultimately what I signed up for? And the thing I kept coming back to was being a speaker. And at the time, this was 18, 19 years ago or so, there were no books, podcasts, coaching, resources whatsoever on speaking. And so I found myself emailing other speakers, stalking other speakers, harassing them, kind of pick a brain sort of thing, learned a couple things, started booking some gigs, and eventually got to a point where I was booking some more gigs and was doing 60, 70 paid speaking gigs a year. And so that was my career for many, many years, traveling all over, primarily the US, doing a lot of gigs, and it was a blast. I absolutely loved it. And then it later evolved into the Speaker Lab, which I'm sure we'll get into.
What kind of gigs are these? Like who were you speaking in front of?
Yeah, I did a lot in the education space. So primarily with high schools, colleges, teachers, educators, parents, to a lot of school assemblies, a lot of student leadership conferences. And so if you remember back in high school, you might have been involved with student council or DECA or FBLA or FCCLA, FFA, some of these different clubs. And a lot of them would have regional or state or national conferences or conventions, and they'd bring, thousands of students together, and I'd be the speaker for it. And it was awesome. Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't a nonprofit. I wanted to eat and live indoors. And so we did that for many, many years. And it was like this pseudo little celebrity thing. You'd travel around and speak at these conferences of thousands of people, and they'd want to take pictures with you and sign autographs, and it was a weird world.
Yeah.
But we did that for many years.
And what were you teaching these? Mostly it was mostly kids you're talking to, like
yeah,
teenagers?
I mean, it was a lot of like high school, high school, college students, and so a lot of it was on helping students take responsibility, take ownership for life, and like life can be what you want it to be, but it's up to you to make it happen. So we talked a lot about that. We also talked a lot about helping students make a transition from high school into college in the real world, and so thinking about what do you want to do with your life, and what are the things that you need to do to make that happen. And so that was the core of what we did for many years.
One of the kind of tropes in the world, or even I guess you call it that, or maybe characters, is like this idea of like the motivational speaker,
Sure.
in Chris Farley style, right?
Yeah.
Like, was
Matt
that
Foley.
At the time? Were you made fun of? Did you like think, oh, I'm just like a motivational? Like, was that cool for you? Were you thinking, oh man, people are gonna make fun of me for that? Like, is that a thing? You know what I mean? Getting at?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. No, I don't. I mean, there's definitely like the stereotype, of the Matt Foley type character, and the sweaty and just yelling and screaming, but at the same time, like the reality is everyone watching, listening to this, we can all think of speakers that we have heard that have made some type of impact in our life. Yeah, and it could be, someone that like we heard one time and we don't even, I can't even remember their name, but something that they said just stuck with me and resonated with me, and it changed the trajectory of my life. Or someone that, we've seen speak hundreds or thousands of times, a professor or a pastor or, whoever that said something that profoundly impacted us. And so every single one of us have been impacted in some way by a speaker. Yeah. And so to be able to do that and to make that kind of impact when, like I can look back and know that like I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people in person, not webinars, not, online things, but like in person, and shook a lot of hands and had a lot of people come up and like, in tears, like, wow, you don't understand what I'm going through and how that helped me. And so it's incredibly like gratifying, fulfilling, rewarding, doing something like that.
I think there's a super interesting connection there to like modern day influencers on like, in Instagram, TikTok, whatever. Yeah. So like a lot of people maybe listening to this want to put themselves out there. Maybe they had the idea of like, oh, it'd be fun to be able to put information out there. But again, the same way they're like, oh, but there's like a stigma, or there's I don't want to be made fun of for putting myself out there to go talk, even though like it does change lives. Like, I mean, there are people who have told you that a piece of content you put on the internet has changed your life. And same with me. It's a really cool feeling. So how do people overcome that fear of what people are going to think about them?
Well, one thing even to speak to that further was speaking is one of those mediums where you can watch transformation happening. Right now we're recording something, and we're going to have, according to you, billions of people that will listen to this and watch this. Hundreds of billions.
Yes.
Somehow are going to watch and listen to this.
Have faith, man. Have faith.
All of the people are going to watch and listen to this. And the reality is like we will never like sit and watch someone watch and listen to this, or read a book, or watch a video, or whatever it may be. But when you're speaking, you're watching, and you can see like, are they tracking? Are they with you? Are they nodding? Are they smiling? Are they paying attention? Are they writing notes? Are they falling asleep? And you watch that in real time happen versus like if you make YouTube videos or TikTok shorts or whatever it may be, like you just don't get to see any of that. So that's one of the cool things about speaking. Now, I would also say that speaking also has this like certain, not necessarily stigma, but people assume that like being a speaker means that you have to be this overly confident person or this larger than life personality. And so what if I'm not a Tony Robbins character? Am I, can I still be a speaker? And the reality is like speakers come in a lot of different like shapes and sizes. And so there's going to be speakers that are that over the top, larger than life personality, and some that are much more quiet and reserved, but are really, really powerful in how they communicate. And so part of, I think the initial question was like, building confidence with that. And I think speaking is no different than a lot of things, where the more you do it, the more confident you become. The first time that you record an interview or put out some type of piece of content, you're like, I think this is good, but I don't know. If you're playing a sport or an instrument or whatever the craft or the thing is that you're doing, the first several times you just suck at it. But over time, like you just get better at it. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can go on autopilot and I've got this nailed, but you start to build some confidence that I've done this before and I'm not going to screw it up, and I still got to be sharp and focusing on my game, but I do have a level of confidence that this is going to go okay. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what that means to be able to speak well, like whether it's in front of people or it could be on camera or Instagram or whatever your thing is, like your ability to communicate with people. It could be in a room of 4 people you're trying to pitch a real estate deal to, or you're trying, whatever. Maybe this is too harsh, but I would say the majority of people are terrible communicators.
Yeah.
They're just not good at communicating their point. They're scared to talk in front of any more than one person. How does somebody develop that skill to be able to communicate effectively in a situation like this or other?
Absolutely. And so again, even if you don't necessarily want to be a professional speaker, and again, that's the world I've been in and where I've spent a lot of my career, I don't necessarily believe that every single person needs to be a professional speaker. You and I had a conversation, I remember in Maui, and you were like, should I be a speaker? And I kind of came to like, you don't have to do this,
dude,
man.
An hour in,
I'm trying to talk you out of this. You know?
An hour in, you're like, do you even want to be a speaker? And I'm like, no. And you're like, why are we talking about this?
What are we doing?
This?
Like, I'm glad we have acai bowls, but like, what are we talking about here? And so I think that's, true where even in like a private conversation with a friend, I'm telling you, like, you don't have to do this, And so not everybody has to be a professional speaker by any means. And one of the things about speaking is that there are people that we see that do 50, 75, 100 gigs a year, and other people that do 5 gigs a year. And so it's not that like one's better or worse than the other, but like you can decide and choose for yourself how speaking fits into what it is that you're trying to do or accomplish. Now, as far as like, let's say you're watching, listening, going like, I don't have any desire to be, a quote unquote professional or public speaker. But the reality is like every single one of us, we're always communicating something to someone. And so whether that be, like you said, you're pitching some type of real estate deal, or you are within your company, in a meeting, or you're asked to present in front of your board, or you're just talking to family members, or you're called on to, hey, can you share your thoughts or ideas on something like this? Like, the ability to clearly articulate and communicate what it is that you're talking about, to clearly get your idea across and do it in an interesting and compelling way, is a really, really valuable skill. Even if you don't want to stand on stage and do that. So whether it's in a podcast setting or whatever it may be, the ability to do that, like people oftentimes, if we're at a conference or an event and we see a speaker or someone that clearly communicates an idea, we associate credibility, we associate like recognition and prestige with that person, just because they're not necessarily even like charismatic, but they can just clearly communicate something. They're like, that person knows something that I want to pay attention to and learn from. And so that's really, really powerful and effective.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes about like Alex Hormozy. Hormozy in the world of like internet marketing, and he's one of the more prolific like Instagram guys out there, right? And there's just something about the way he communicates. It doesn't even matter what he says sometimes. I feel like he could be saying something completely mundane. Like, there were once 3 bears and there was a hot porridge, it doesn't matter.
Right.
You're just like transfixed by it because he knows how to communicate well. And therefore, it's like I'm way more willing to buy something from him or want to meet him or get an autograph. Whatever the thing is he stands out as special because of his ability to communicate. In fact, back in the day, I used to always make fun of communication majors at like college. I'd be like, communication's the worst degree. Like, you might as well just like burn your college degree. Like, who cares? You should go get like math or science, something that's important. Today I am 180 degree on that. Like, I'm like, almost the only degree I think people should get is like your ability to, like, good communication. Yeah. Because that affects every other area of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not, again, think about whatever, career, profession that you have, you're going to be communicating something to somebody. Yeah. And so making that a priority of saying, how do I best clearly articulate this and communicate this. And one thing that I think is kind of a misconception about speaking, for example, is that people oftentimes assume like when you're speaking that you're presenting something different every single time that you talk. And so the way I like to think about it is think about like a chef, for example. A chef, if they're working on some type of new recipe, I'm not chef, I can't cook squat, but if they're working on some type of new recipe, they have an educated guess of, I think this will work, I think this will make sense, but they kind of throw it all together and then they're tasting it and constantly iterating on that. So I need to cook this a little bit longer, or overcook this, or it needs a little bit more salt, or maybe a little less sugar. And so I'm constantly tasting it to the point where it's like, okay, now I've got it. Now this is the dish. And the same thing is true with speaking. So I think one of the best things speakers can do is, and again, even if you're not a speaker, is like when you're sharing ideas, you're kind of just testing something. I'm going to just kind of tell a story, or I'm going to tell an anecdote, maybe at a party, or maybe at a podcast interview, and just kind of see like, does this resonate? Does this make sense? Do I feel confident with this? And just kind of see what kind of feedback I get. So like when you asked me, tell me my story, and I'm talking about my youth pastor and the impact that he had on me and kind of those early years, like I've told that hundreds of times. And so I feel confident telling that. And so that may be something that I share on stage, or maybe something I never share on stage, but I know at some point someone's going to ask me, tell me about how you got into speaking, right? And so what are those things that you are asked about regularly that you can craft some type of story behind and practice it and again, kind of taste it and iterate on it?
So what are some practical steps somebody can take if they want to be better at communicating?
I think one of the best things that you can do is really spend the time behind the scenes to practice and prepare. And so I think a big misconception is great speakers are just naturally great. And so they just hop up on stage and they wing it. And we're just going to scribble some ideas on a napkin and we're going to shoot from the hip. And it's all just going to magically work out. And yes, there is an element to they are very good at what it is that they do. But you also look at, let's take like a professional athlete or a comedian or a singer or a musician. Like you see them up on stage or you see them on the field or on the court and you think, well, they're just naturally good. And yeah, there is an element of that, but they also have spent an enormous amount of time practicing and preparing behind the scenes. So it looks effortless, but the reality is like they've put in so much work behind the scenes that it becomes effortless by the time that you see them. So, if you go see a Vegas show, you see the Super Bowl, you see like people that are like world class at their craft. And it's not because they just woke up and they're like, we're just going to hop up there and we're just going to do our song and dance and it's just going to be okay. Like they spend so much time behind the scenes. So even like driving here to hang out with you and think about this, like thinking through like, okay, what are the things that, we may talk about the things that I want to make sure that I've put some thought and effort into if I'm giving a talk of some type. So I'll give you another example. Like at this time this recording, we have our company retreat coming up here in Nashville in a couple of days. And we have the entire company coming together. And there's a couple points where I've got to share a couple things. And there's, some things that I'm like, I could probably wing it. But I spent several hours this morning just going through, like really thinking about what I'm going to communicate. And probably to most people who will see that, they won't think anything of it. Like, oh, Grant's just sharing a couple of ideas. Yeah. But it's like, really, there's a lot of intentionality going into, is this the best way to communicate this? How do I communicate this so it's memorable, so that it's sticky? And so really putting some effort and energy into it versus, again, just kind of like, just kind of, make it up and wing it.
Yeah, I did a dinner last night here with a group. I have a small mastermind called the 50. It's just like all real estate multimillionaires, and we get together a couple times a year, 4 times a year. So we did it in Nashville. We did it actually down in Franklin. Are you in Franklin?
Yep, we're in that area. Yep.
Yeah, so we were right down in Franklin doing this like weird honey tasting thing that was super cool at South Hall. Have you been to South Hall?
Huh.
That place is legit. There's like this cool like resort spa thing.
Oh, it's brand new. Like opened like within the past year. Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah,
super cool. Take your wife to honey tasting. It's super cool. Mainly because the guy in charge of it is just like the guy he's like a sommelier for honey or whatever. So he's like obsessed with honey. Yeah. And like his love for honey is infectious. And it's just like, it's cool to watch people like master their craft. But anyway, so afterwards we're having dinner. The event, it's the second day of the event, last day of the event, and it's time for everyone to leave. So I stand up and I'm like, oh, I got to say something. But I didn't put any work into what I was going to say at the end. No work whatsoever. So I winged it, right?
Yeah.
Winged it.
I
winged it. And it was fine. I was like, hey, you guys are all rock stars. Appreciate you all. But I sat down, actually, I went and told Alex, actually, right after. I said, this is something like I could have spent 5 minutes even thinking, what would be a powerful ending? And I probably would have thought for 5 minutes, maybe 10, could have come up with a simple anecdote or a story or something to tell those guys that would leave them motivated and excited and just end on a boom.
Yep.
But instead, I felt like it kind of ended like, hey, thanks everyone. Like, right? And it doesn't take 100 hours of practice for that. It was like, it would have been 10 minutes of me thinking about it and I would have had a story.
Yeah.
But
just a level of intentionality.
Just being intentional about knowing I got to close it up.
This kind of goes back to one of the things we were touching on earlier of having almost like a reservoir of different stories and kind of anecdotes that you can kind of pull from. And so if you look at a great example is a comedian, like when we watch a comedian on a Netflix special or something, we just think that like, oh, they just hop up and they're funny, but they spend so much time in like little clubs and little venues, just testing material. I think this is funny. I think this will make sense. I think this will resonate. Okay, that didn't work at all, or that was really good. And they're kind of refining it and crafting it. Like we talked about with a chef making a dish or a recipe of some type. And then what happens is by the time they get up on stage and record for a Netflix special or whatever it may be, it's a very polished, finished product. And so that's the thing that we see, but we don't see them like testing and trying it and refining it. But over time, like they start to build kind of this bank of different bits that they can do and that they can pull from. And so the same thing is true for a speaker, having like different stories or anecdotes or points or references that you can make, knowing that like you're going to get some of the similar situations and questions. And so knowing what you can kind of reference and pull from in those instances.
Yeah. One of my favorite books I read in the past probably decade, it's like definitely like, probably a top 10. It's called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. And in this book, it's about a guy who's a competitive storyteller for the Moth and that whole like world. But he's like the 6-time Grand Slam champion, whatever. So he writes this book about telling stories. The whole thing's about telling stories. But one of his advice in there is like, how do you tell stories? Like every single night before he goes to bed, he just writes down one story from that day.
Yeah.
It could be super mundane, could be super funny, could be boring, could be whatever. But after the course of years, you now have just notebook after notebook full of like these little one-line stories.
Yeah.
I've seen these little books, like the line a day books.
Yeah.
Similar concept.
I remember this happened a few years ago where my wife and I and our daughters, we were at Disney World, and I won't have to tell you the whole story, but something funny happened there, and I remember like just kind of like carrying it in my head, like. Yep. There's something there.
Yeah,
and I remember like getting to the parking lot and like pulling out my phone and writing it out a note and just like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And I don't even know if I'm going to use it or if it's going to fit anywhere, but I know there was something there.
Yeah.
And so I would admittedly say like, I'm not great at that habit now, but getting in that habit of when something happens of just capturing it, you know, on your phone or on a piece of paper or whatever it may be. And just knowing like, okay, I'm going to do something with this. Like I heard it described one time that things that are cooked in a crock pot taste better than things that are cooked in a microwave. Things that are cooked in a crock pot taste better than things that are cooked in a microwave. And so having this thing that like, okay, something happened, I'm just carrying it around. I'm just stewing it. I'm just marinating. I don't know what's going to come of it or where I'm going to go with it, but something's there. And it's a story I've told a lot and told on stage a lot. And so I knew there was something there, but it just kind of had to marinate. But first I had to like capture it versus sitting down and going like, I need a story. What do I, you know, and then you're just you're staring at a blank screen with nothing to go off of.
Years ago, I went into a public bathroom, and it was kind of a nasty bathroom, and there was a dad in there with his kid. This is
okay, I'm going to pause you for a second.
Go ahead,
okay,
please.
So this is also super important of the importance and the power of stories, okay?
Yep.
Because what's going to happen, two things are going to happen. One is right now, you start sounding, a few years ago, I walked into a bathroom, and everyone's like, where's he going with this?
Yep.
Like, we just don't know, like, is this going to be funny? Is this going to be sad? Is this going to be depressing? Is this going to be inspiring? I have no idea, right? But the other thing that's interesting about stories is when we finish this conversation, people finish this recording, that they're going to be able to remember bits and pieces. You know, we may talk for an hour and a half or whatever, but people are going to remember like a few little things, which in some ways is depressing. We spend a lot of time, they're going to remember very, very little of what we talk about. But people will remember stories. And so what's crazy is like sometimes I will go, I'll pick up like my daughters from youth group at church, and they just got out of church, and I ask them, what did the youth pastor talk about? Jesus. He told the story, and then they will like articulate in detail the story.
Isn't that wild?
Because stories are so memorable and powerful. So I cut you off.
I love that though.
I want to hear what happened in the bathroom.
All right, so the bathroom. So I'm in this bathroom, and there's a dad in there with his little kid, and I had Rosie at this point, so we're both dads, and I look over and the little kid walks up to a full-length mirror, dirty bathroom, leans forward and just licks it. Just licks the bathroom mirror. And both the dad and I went, like lean forward, like to stop it, but it's too late, right? And we just like, we both look at the kid. We both just look at each other.
It's dad moment.
Dad moment. Close our eyes and we just walked out. It was like just like a pact. Like we'll never tell the wives, right? That this happened.
That's amazing.
But I have no point to that story. But I say this for a reason. I don't know the point yet, but it's been in my head and it's on a piece of paper. I wrote that story down and I've never found a way to use it yet, but I will. Like somehow, someday I'm going to be like, you know, whatever. And that's like, I mean, you kind of allude to it. Like, there's a dad moment. That's why there's something there. Like every father knows that moment where like another dad, you're like, yeah, we've been here. This is why Bluey is such a popular TV show, is because like every moment in the show Bluey is a parent going, yeah, I've been there before. So anyway, I keep track of these moments. I have an Evernote file where I've got hundreds of these real life examples or fake story. I mean, you know, historical stories, fake stories that just like I heard. Yeah. You never know when you're going to pull it out.
Yeah. But just like having I heard it described one time, like having your radar up.
Yep.
And so that could happen. You could walk out of the bathroom and you could never think twice about it. And your life would be totally fine. You continue to exist and that's no big deal. But just knowing like there's something there and that's something that people can relate to and that's something that people can connect with. I don't know how I'm going to connect the dots, but there's something there. And so continuing to like capture those, have it on radar, and then finding a way to just think through like, okay, now I'm going to find a way just to incorporate that into an interview or the next meeting or the next time I got to give a presentation. Or maybe, you know, tonight when I'm talking with my spouse, I'm going to mention this funny thing that happened. And I'm just going to tell them this funny story. And again, it may not go anywhere, but I'm going to at least be in the routine and the habit of capturing it.
Beautiful. All right. So I want to ask you actually in a second how I might improve that story from your opinion. But before I want to get to this week's show sponsor. So one thing we do on the show, it's a little different, is 100% of the ad revenue from every episode, or from each episode, goes to a charity of the guest choosing. So the question for you is, what breaks your heart, or where should we send the money from this episode?
One thing that my wife and I, we've supported for a little while is Make-A-Wish. Okay. We are really big into experiences and moments and things like especially with our kids. And so we have no connection to Make-A-Wish in terms of like, we don't have a child or actually know anyone personally that was a Make-A-Wish, recipient. But I just think that giving a child like a once in a lifetime type of experience, like that is super, super cool. And so, that's a cool charity to us.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. This I don't think I've ever talked about this before, but it's like a pat on the back for me. So I'm going to brag about myself for a second here. I had a kid who went to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who his wish was to meet me.
No way.
In Hawaii.
That's so awesome.
Make-A-Wish flew him out to Hawaii. We spent a whole day together and just went and went and walked around. It was such a cool moment. Yeah. So I mean, there's no purpose to that story other than say like that was super cool.
That is totally cool.
So shout out to Charlie. He's awesome young man really who's texted me the other day and he's like listening to this podcast every episode. And he's like, awesome. I heard the episode you did with this one and I really like this thing. I'm like,
let's go.
Dude, this guy is awesome. He's on it. But
that's really cool.
Make-A-Wish, huge, very cool thing. All right. With that said, the ad revenue goes to Make-A-Wish. So this week's sponsor.
Hey, here's an urgent message for podcasters, but only if you're seriously committed and you're willing to spend a little bit of money to work with a rock star team like Podcast Point Man. Did you know 90% of podcasts don't make it past 3 episodes? It's crazy, right? I mean, what's the difference between podcasters who fade away and then the top performers who get downloads, they make money, they raise capital, they have fun along the way? Well, I can tell you, a lot of it comes down to the team around you. You'll give yourself a much better chance of building a profitable and successful podcast if you have experts helping edit video and audio, handling monetization, and building a growth strategy. So if you're serious about taking things to the next level with your podcast or just getting started with one and blowing up your show, I highly recommend Kevin's team at Podcast Point Man. I hired Kevin over at Bigger Pockets, actually, and we work with his team to this day. So here's what to do if you're a podcaster who wants to grow. Check out Kevin's free masterclass. It's called 5 Ways to Grow Your Show Today. You can find that video on his homepage at podcastpointman.com. That's podcastpointman.com for a masterclass on podcast growth. Link in the show notes.
All right, story. I need a good story on how to sell mortgages with licking a bathroom mirror. But anyway, how would you improve that story though? Are there ways I could make that funny, more memorable? Could I have started it stronger? Any suggestions on storytelling?
Yeah, so there's probably a few things that you could do. One is to think about details that add to the story, but don't necessarily take away from the story or become like this distraction. So if you said, okay, it was a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and I'm at XYZ mall in such and such city, and the weather was in the mid 70s that day, and we go into and like we were shopping for a pair of jeans that day, and like on and on and on. It's like the things don't actually add to the story, right? Yep. But if you were also to add some details where like I walked into the bathroom with Rosie and it's already just this sketchy bathroom. How many of you have ever been to like a gas station that's at like a road stop or something?
Well, I love that you asked the question. You pulled them into the story.
Yeah. Because immediately people are picturing it in their minds. They're just like, oh yeah, I don't know where this is going, but I know what he's talking about. Like everything is wet. And I'm just like, I don't know why everything is wet here, but like that's immediately like all of us picture in our minds.
There,
so we're there. We're because you say I went to the bathroom with my daughter, and you're like, well, my bathroom's pretty clean at home. So it's like that what he went to, or like kind of getting a picture without adding so many details. It's like that's not making any difference in the story. If you notice a sitcom, I heard someone say one time in a sitcom, you never see the characters going to the bathroom because it doesn't move the story forward. It doesn't it doesn't change anything with the story, and so they cut out the non-essential details that keep the story moving forward, but enough details that you can kind of picture it in your mind.
Yeah.
So describing that. Perhaps even describing like if there's anything interesting or compelling about this other dad or the other kid that again an audience can just relate to and put themselves into the story of just like, oh, he's kind of describing my kid right now, or like I know that kid, I know exactly what he's talking about there. The other thing that makes stories interesting, and especially humor, is when you allow the audience to get to the punchline before you say it. Okay, so if you said, you're describing this kid, and the kid walks up to the mirror and he kind of looks around for a second, and then he opens his mouth and he sticks his tongue out, and the audience is already going like, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. Don't say he did it, and you're allowing them to get there before you get there. And so then you're kind of filling in the blank and like, he licked it, and everyone's like, oh, he licked it. I knew it. I knew he was going, I can't believe he licked it, and from there you could do something about like, we had to get a tetanus shot, and we had to, I had to sign this waiver with this, and you can kind of embellish and do some like funny bits there. You can also, sometimes what speakers can do with a story or some type of bit is they will start telling something and take a quick rabbit trail on it. Like how many of you have ever been on a road trip before, and you can just talk about road trips and then come back to the bathroom, And so again, the point is like, have a reason to do it, and don't just like, how many of you been to a road trip? You guys ever been to Oklahoma? They have a really good barbecue, and you start like going, that's not going anywhere, but adding something to the story that makes it again a bit more memorable.
Yeah, what about somebody who says they're not funny? Like, I'm just not funny. I'm not a funny person. I don't have a great sense of humor.
I don't think you necessarily have to be funny. And again, some of this depends on the context of what we're talking about, where you could or couldn't be funny. So if you are in the context of, let's say, an actual, a professional or public speaker, and you're giving a speech, and you're like, how do I add some humor to it? One is, again, I don't think necessarily everyone has to be funny, because there are certainly speakers who, they give a presentation, they're much more serious kind of in nature, but they may say like every so often a line that, because it's more not necessarily heavy, but just a more serious type of talk, that the funny line that they do say is more powerful and effective versus someone who's just funny the entire time. One thing that I think that speakers can do that's very effective with humor is oftentimes speakers are like, I don't feel like I'm funny, or I don't know what to say, or I don't even know if this is funny, but slides, pictures, videos can be really, really effective. So let me tell you a story, a quick example. A few years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and there was a keynote speaker, a friend of both of ours, I think, and they gave a talk, and the talk goes fine. And within that, they were a funny speaker, but one of the things that they did was they showed a video from YouTube, and it wasn't their video, it was just a random video. And it was a 20, 30-second video. And it was a really funny video. And so after their session, I am doing a session on speaking and finding gigs and developing your talk. And I said, okay, how many of you thought the previous speaker was funny? And everyone's like, oh yeah, very funny speaker. I said, what was the funniest part of what they did? And everyone's like, oh, that video was hysterical, right? And so they're associating the speaker being funny with all they did was push play on a video that they didn't even make. They just found it. And especially today with the amount of just funny content that's on the internet, whether it be, here's a tweet that I saw that's not mine, that I just saw that's funny, or got a good reaction, or a picture on Instagram, or a short little reel, or whatever it may be. Like, there's a lot of funny content that you can use out there that's already been like vetted and is funny material that you can insert into your presentation.
That's really good, man. When you're giving a speech, let's go back to speech talking for a minute, and I'm going to do
speech talking.
Speech talking.
Okay, yeah.
Let's talk about speech talking.
Let's do speech talking.
Yeah,
great.
Speech.
I'm excited about this.
And I'm going to solicit some more unpaid consulting from you.
If we can get some acai bowls here, it just fits. And the ocean.
Stetson, acai bowls, please.
The ocean would help a lot.
He's like, did you just snap at me?
He did. He definitely snapped.
I definitely snapped. Should a person memorize their speech beginning to end? I remember back in the day, one of our friends, Pat Flynn, said, I think it was like a 40-minute speech. He goes, I memorized it word for word. Yeah. I was like, oh, I never want to be a speaker if I have to memorize 40 minutes word by word.
Yeah. All right. So I got several thoughts here. One is like, think about music, for example. I'm not a musician. I know that you are. I'm pretty sure, right?
I do some music.
Okay. And so you do music.
I don't know if I can call myself a musician.
I do music.
I do the music thing.
All right. You do the music and the speech talking.
Yes.
So you have two ends of the spectrum. You have sheet music, classical music. And this is like, you play this exactly as it is printed, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you have jazz. And jazz is just kind of like, we kind of have an idea here where we're going, and it's just kind of free range. I think good speaking is a combination of both. And so you can take the approach of like what Pat was talking about, where I have a speech and it is memorized verbatim, word for word. The danger in something like that is oftentimes it's easy to over prepare, and so it feels fake and it feels phony, right? So, for example, if you're giving if we're at a sporting event and someone's singing the national anthem and they butcher the lyrics, everybody in there knows that they butcher the lyrics because we know what the lyrics are supposed to be. But if you're giving a speech and like you forget a point, or you tell points out of order, or you forgot a story, or something didn't come out quite right, nobody knows the difference. It's not like someone's sitting back there with a script going like, whoa, hang on, go back to, you missed this line. Like that's not the case at all. But at the same time, like we talked about, if you're just kind of getting up there and winging it, I don't think it is as effective as it could be. So for example, if you said, Grant, tell me about how you met your wife or how you proposed to your wife. Like I could tell you that story. I was there. It's been a minute, but I could tell that story. But if you said, take 30 minutes, take an hour, think about when you proposed to your wife and come back and tell us that story, I could probably tell a better story because I have more time to think about, okay, where were we? What was that day like? What do we do leading up to that day? And so when I'm writing it out, so this is for me personally, when I'm prepping a brand new presentation or talk, I worked on this morning. I'm writing it out verbatim. Now, the point isn't to memorize it verbatim, but I really want to think through how I'm saying something. And so as I'm just kind of like typing as if I'm saying it, it's just helping me to kind of clarify my thinking. And I may not say it verbatim like that, but I want to get the essence down there. So then whenever I am practicing or preparing for it, I'm reading through it. Again, not trying to memorize it. There's going to be parts where you're like, I need to say the line like this. Like this is a very crisp, clear, tight, concise line that's memorable. But other things where like, I know the idea of it and kind of where I'm going with it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be said verbatim. So the danger though is speakers who are over memorized and over prepared to the point where it just feels phony. It feels fake, because it's important to remember that as a speaker, you are a human talking to a collection of other humans. And so act like a human. And so the more it feels formulaic or robotic, and then I take 5 steps over here and I move my hands like this, like it just, you lose a connection with the audience because they're like, they're not even here with us right now. Like they're just regurgitating this thing. Like just play a video instead, you know? And so I think the being prepared and being polished without necessarily being over polished or over prepared, so that you can still be natural and real and authentic with the audience is really, really important. Yeah,
really good. In social media, in creating social media content, I know you do some social media. Like, does this same stuff apply, like storytelling and all that? Do you use that in your social media work?
Now, I don't do a ton of social media. So, I mean, there's pros and cons with social media. I know that you do a ton with it, and it's been a huge platform with you and for you. Yeah, I think that absolutely, like, especially even the ideas that you might share in person or from stage or in a live type of setting have to be even better and tighter if they're shared in a social environment or in an online setting, because there's so much more competition. So if you are giving a speech or a presentation in front of an audience, or you're presenting in a meeting or something like that, the people in that room generally are just going to be polite and engaged because they're just nice human beings. But if I'm watching, you know, a 15-second reel and it's not catching my attention in the next, 2 seconds, like I'm swiping, I'm clicking to the next thing, I'm moving on. And so even more so, it has to be super, super concise and tight and be engaging enough to keep your attention, which again, you think like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, like that's not much time. But like you think about your own social media habits, and like if something's not catching your attention, or if you see something and like you skim it super, super briefly, think about like a YouTube video. If someone sends you a video, it's like, dude, you gotta watch this video. Just trust me, you gotta watch this. What do we all do? We go to the lower left corner and we see how long is this video. Yeah. And if it's anything more than like a few minutes, you're like, dude, send me a 7-minute video. Like, do you not like me or something? Like,
I get these videos from people occasionally, like my relatives, like distant relatives, like, you need to watch this. It's
just
like,
trust me.
Yeah, it's like an hour and 45 minutes of like anti-vaccine conspiracy theory of some kind. I'm like,
that just took up my day, Grandma. Like that's a commitment. I can't do that.
This. Yeah, it's like, give me like a 2-second summary.
Exactly.
Drives me nuts. All right. I know I'm jumping all over the place. I want to go back real quick to my free consulting session here.
Okay, come on back.
I got a blank page in front of me. Right here, and I'm like, I was just asked to speak at a conference, or let's just say I got one coming up. We got the Better Life Real Estate Summit coming up here in May. Okay. I'm going to give a keynote to that because it's my conference. By the way, go to Better Life. No, what is the address? Real Estate REI Summit 2024.com. I think so. Let's try that. REI Summit 2024.com.
Go buy that domain real quick.
Probably should. I got to give a speech there.
Yeah.
So it's actually real life. What do I do? Tell me, like, if people they have to give a speech. Could be they got to go. They're the best man at a wedding.
Yep.
They are gonna go do a real estate talk. What do I do? Blank page.
Yeah, blank page. And for those listening, he literally has a blank page.
I literally have a blank page.
Right
We're going
now.
to craft my speech right here.
All right. So one of the first things you got to do is kind of begin with the end in mind of like, what's the main idea? What's the point that we're like, why are you giving this speech? What's kind of the context of it? What is it that you want people to take away from? So for example, when I'm working on this morning, I got to give a talk next week, and I'm thinking like, okay, where is this in relation to the overall retreat and kind of the setting? What's the main things that I want people to take away from? And this could be, maybe it's something actionable. I want them to invest in this fund by the end of this, or maybe I want them to feel something inspirational. It's the beginning of a new year, and I want them to feel encouraged as they start a new year. Whatever the thing is,
Sure.
What's that main thing that I want them to experience as a result of that? So beginning with that, and from there, then we can kind of like just brain dump and just kind of brainstorm. Like, okay, in order to get there, think of it like a road trip. I know what the destination is. Let's think of all the different possible things associated with that. And it's not like, well, I don't know where this would fit. No, like unfiltered, just a brain dump of ideas, of stories, of the bathroom licking mirror thing. That may work, that may not. No filter. Just I'm writing down ideas that I think could work. Now, another thing that we touched on earlier is I think that most of the time, especially with speakers, is we're not working on a fresh talk all the time. Like it's always like, I'm staring at this blank screen. It is, I've given a presentation, and now I'm figuring out like, how can I improve that, or how do I try some new material within that? So it's oftentimes rare that speakers should be like giving a brand new talk just completely from scratch. And I understand like in this context, but two questions to ask to make this real practical is so what and now what? So what and now what? Yeah, the audience is always asking themselves, so what? So you just told the story, or you just gave the speech, or you just gave this presentation. So what? That's cool for you. What does that have to do with me? So what? And then now what? Like, what am I supposed to do as a result of this? Am I supposed to invest in something, or take some type of action, or think something differently, or feel something differently? Like, what am I supposed to do because of what we just talked about? So thinking through that so what and now what, and again, kind of thinking through what that destination is, brainstorming and just brain dumping some ideas, some stories, some points, like, hey, here's a key idea. I don't know where it's going to go, but this is something I want to communicate. And then from there, you can start to kind of flesh it out and kind of figure out like, okay, I can start to get an idea of like these 1, 2, 3 things are probably the main ideas that I want to say. This story would actually work really well with this second point. And it starts to kind of form a skeleton there that then you can put some meat on the bones of what it could look like. But if you don't know, like, why am I giving the speech, and what's the point of it, and who's actually in the audience, and how is it relevant to them, and why should they care, then it doesn't matter, because otherwise you're coming up with random stuff that's not going to make any impact.
Yeah. So if I'm thinking like, just use this specifically, I'm like, people are going to be almost all existing real estate investors of some kind. Not all, some might be brand new, but let's say a majority of them have a few deals under their belt. Most are looking for financial independence or financial freedom. They think that real estate's a way to get there. They're at a conference to learn about real estate. So I start with that idea of like, this is who's there, the audience. And then where do I want to take them? Mm-hmm. Am I just pulling an idea? Like, for example, let's just say scaling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea of scaling. Like, I think that would be a cool topic. Like how to scale from one unit to, financial freedom.
Yep.
So now I've got an outcome. Now I've got a way to get there. And then I just work back from that. That's an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. If you
right?
knew that, like, okay, I know my audience, and again, this is important to know the audience, to know what it is that they, let me give an example. Like when I was doing a lot of speaking in the education space, if I was going to speak to a high school assembly or a student leadership conference, they are demographically the same group of people, right? But from a presentation standpoint, those are two different audiences, because a school assembly, they have to be there, and a leadership conference, they want to be there. And so think about from your audience standpoint of going like, okay, do these people want to be there? Are they forced to be there? They probably want to be there. And so are they there because they want to learn from you and want to be like you? Do they want to build some $100 million portfolio in real estate? Are they interested in being a syndicate and learning about how to raise money and work with investors? Are they there because they want to know how to do flips? Like what's the thing that perhaps that they are there that they want to learn from? Now, maybe again, in the context of like a keynotes are typically going to be more broad and big ideas, and workshops are going to typically be more practical. So if you're going to go to a real estate conference, it's typically going to be like, here's the 3 big trends that we see in 2024 for real estate. Yeah. And you may go to a workshop that's more about, here's how to reduce your costs on your next flip. Like those are 2 very different things. One's going to be much more practical, tactical, in the weeds than the other. But again, just being clear on like, what's the main thing that this audience is coming for that they want to leave with?
Yeah, that's great, man. That's really good. I was thinking about like the idea of like some of the biggest problems they're going to have is like the biggest problem people have is they don't have enough money. Mm-hmm. Like that's probably the number one objection to real estate. So maybe I'll cater my approach around that somehow, around like, hey, I've raised $400 million in the past 5 years. Like, here's how I've done that.
Now, there's also like in that context, they are coming because they already know who you are. So there's some settings where, again, let's go back to the school assembly. If I'm showing up to speak, they don't have any context of who I am. Yeah. They are happy I got them out of class, and that's kind of the extent of it. So I've got to spend a lot of time up front just building rapport and earning trust with them, And so there's it's like if you go see a specific comedian, like they don't have to build a ton of rapport. Like, I'm here to see you. Yeah. And anything you say, I know is going to be funny because I've watched a lot of your stuff. Versus like, we're just going to a comedy club. And like, I don't know who this comedian is, so I got to kind of learn a little bit about them and their shtick and, see if it's something that I resonate with. So in your case, what you're talking about, you're going to a setting where like it's a home game for you and people already know who you are. You don't have to build a ton of rapport. So that's a massive, massive advantage already. You don't have to tell them a ton of your backstory. They're like, I already know. And so being able to lean into that and use that as an advantage is important.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Well, I want to shift back over to your personal life a little bit. Some of the stuff that you've done in building a business around it. So let's go back first. Where did your wife enter the picture?
Very early. We were high school sweethearts. And so, we started dating when I was 15. She was 17. So caught myself a cougar.
There you go.
Come on now. Let's go.
Look at that.
And so, we've been together almost 27 years. So we got married when I was 20 and she was 21, 22. I started dating when we were just mere children. And so I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old today, 2 girls, and looking at them thinking like, wow, I can imagine you discovering the love of your life at this age. Like, that's insane. But at the same time, like, in many, many ways, we've grown up together and we've experienced so much of life together. And, the highs and lows of that with our families, with ourselves. Today life is really, really good. We're living a very better life than we had historically. But to have experienced it together and know like, man, you remember like the good old days of also like when we were broke and just trying to figure it out. And we went back to, we live here in Nashville now, but we're born and raised in Missouri, and we were back there over the holidays. And so pointing out to our girls of like, see this little tiny apartment? Like that's where me and mom used to live. And there used to be a little Chinese cashew chicken place here, and we could get a meal for $5, but we could only afford that like once a month, and we'd have to split it, just like taking us back to those days of just like, dang, it was rough, but it was so, so good to have experienced that and kind of grown up together with life.
This is a random question I wasn't going to go, but we'll go. How do you raise kids in a world where you are well off? I'm well off. I've got kids. You've got kids. Like, how do we raise them when they're not growing up eating $5, meals once a month? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do we raise kids, that are wealthier?
I've thought a lot about this. I've been, there's a coach and mentor here in Nashville that who's 20 years older than both of us. And I have lunch with him once a month, and I have for years. And just like, I want to be like you when I grow up. What do I need to know? And this is a big thing that we've talked a lot about. And he said that, part of the danger is that you can potentially be setting up a unattainable bar for like future spouses for your daughters and future, families. Of just like, man, I remember in my family, we used to do this, and like now they can't do that,
So my kids only stay at like the nicest hotels in town, like no matter where we go. And I'm like, are they going to be okay with a Super 8?
So one thing that we've been really, really intentional about is with giving and including our girls with that. So let me give you the tangible example. I feel weird sharing this, but I'll share it because it's kind of a fun, practical little story. So one thing that we've done every Christmas, we've done this for several years, is we started this a few years ago, is that on Christmas Day, we were like, we want to go out to eat, but nothing's open on Christmas Day. And so there's only one place that I know of, and it's Waffle House. And so if you were working at Waffle House on Christmas Day, you probably need the money. And so we would go to Waffle House. And the first year we were like, what if we tipped $100? You know, like, wow, that'd be super cool. So let's tip $100. And you could see just the gratitude and gratefulness. And so then we did that for a couple of years. And then one year we were kind of looking around, and I was like, I wonder if we could pay for the whole restaurant. Now, keep in mind here, Waffle House is like, you can feed a family of 5 for like $20, and there's not that many tables in there. But just the idea of like, let's pay for the whole restaurant. So we started doing that. And then last year was like, what if we paid for the whole restaurant and we tipped every employee? And so we did that last year. And so this year, we go to the ATM the day before, we take out a bunch of cash, and we have a wad of hundreds going into Waffle House, and we were like, hey, can we pay for everybody, and we want to tip every employee here $100. Now that's it was like $150, $200 to pay for the whole restaurant, and I think there was 7 employees, so that's $700 there, so $900 to say, which again, it's not nothing, but it's also not like not insignificant. And so, but watching each of these employees are like, no, I didn't even, I'm a cook. It's like, no, I got $100 for you too, buddy. And just the joy that brought to their face. But like for our girls to immediately be like, that was so cool. We got to do that again. And just what they see with us. I think also what they see with like how we treat people and the kind of person that you are. If you are spending money in nice restaurants or nice hotels or whatever, and you're just kind of a jerk to people, like your kids pick up on that. But if like, yes, I spend money on these things, but I'm also like a very generous, kind-hearted human being, and your kids see that, like that also carries a lot of weight. So I think involving them with giving, including them with that. One thing that my wife and I are really intentional on is, I remember hearing this, I think it was from Will Smith in an interview he did with Oprah. And like one of his kids was talking about like, hey, Dad, like we're rich. And he was real quick to point out, no. Like me and Mom are rich. Yeah. You're broke. Yeah. You don't have anything. And so just in a playful, humble way, just to remind like, hey, me and Mom have a great life, but it's because we've worked really, really hard for this. And so like when we talk about, hey, that apartment and that cashew chicken place, it's because that's what we had. And we got to this point. Again, that's not a magical thing, and that's not close your eyes really tight and click your heels together and it all just magically works out. But like we've worked really, really hard and been super intentional with our life to get to this point. So I think having our girls see some of that has been helpful. One other thing I thought of that this coach and mentor here in town shared with me, as he said, it's helpful for your kids to see you struggle at times. Like sometimes your kids just see your highlight reel, and sometimes like we're intentional in like just showing them, intentionally or unintentionally showing them like, or shielding them from the bad stuff, Yeah. And so it's not like sharing our deepest, darkest secrets or anything, but just saying like, hey, here's an area where I screwed up, or here's an area that I made a mistake, or here's something that I'm just not sure on. Or, the other day, like I wasn't a great dad, and I said that I shouldn't have said that, and I'm really sorry. And like just bringing humanity to it with your kids helps them to see that like, okay, my dad, I put him on a pedestal, but also like he's a human being as well. And so, I don't know, there'd be a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, I've been trying to, lately, I mean, I think every human today has an addiction of some level to their screens,
Sure.
like, right? We all struggle with that. And I've been trying to be open with my kids about that. This is something Daddy struggles with. I mean, my kids are 7 and 4.
Yeah.
But it's like when they really, really want to, watch their iPad or play their game or whatever, and we're struggling with like, what is the balance? Is it 0? Is it something? And we go back and forth. But when it's time, especially with my son Wilder, like he is so into it. Like he really wants to play any game, like Angry Birds is his favorite thing in the world, right? But he gets mad when he has to get taken away. And so I've been trying to explain to him, and I think it's getting through to him. Like, buddy, I have the same thing you do. I have the same feeling. Like I get mad when I have to put my phone away too. Like I would just love to sit on here all day long, but I can't, and it's hard. Like if you help me, I'll help you. That kind of thing. And I think it's getting through to him. I don't know. I think Rosie's more receptive. She's 7, so she kind of gets it more. But she doesn't have as big of a problem. He's got a problem, and I'm like.
But at the same time, like in the scheme of things, it's a 4-year-old boy. You and I, when we were 4-year-olds, we were a hot mess. Like we're still a hot mess. And so, kind of recognizing like the season of life that you're in. There are certainly times where you look at the season that you're in, and you're like, are they going to grow up like this? Is
Yeah.
this going to be forever? And you look back and be like, well, that was a weird season, but we came out of it, and we turned out okay.
Yeah, my wife and I say to each other all the time, like, well, he won't be doing X at 20. They won't be wet in the bed when they're 20, or they won't be whatever, like throwing themselves down in the middle of the grocery store at 20. Like when it's like a thing that we've tried over and over to get them better at, and they're just not getting better at it. It's just like, well, they won't be there at 20. So at some point it gets better, right?
Hypothetically, yeah. No, I remember when so my sister has a little girl, and when she had her daughter, I went over to see them one time, and she her little girl's just crying, and just it's a newborn baby that's just, and my sister's just like in tears and just completely stressed out. And I remember telling her, which I didn't think anything of, but I remember thinking like, hey, it gets easier in some ways and it gets harder in other ways, and as they get older it gets easier and it gets harder, and it gets easier and it gets harder, and like fast forward to at this point our girls are at 17, 15, and 13, and like that's so true, like 17, 15, 13, when we go out to Maui and we come hang out with you, like it's pretty easy. Like you get them on the plane, they each kind of do their own thing, and we'll see in a few hours on the islands, but in other ways it's harder, of like the challenges that they deal with, of self-esteem, of figuring out what they want to do with their life, the things that you're just like, man, if you could just struggle with screens, that'd be simpler, So yeah, like it gets harder in some ways and it gets easier in other ways.
Any tips for a dad who's 10 years ahead of me? Like what do I, as a dad 10 years ahead of me, what do I have to look forward to and worry about?
Yeah, I think a few things, a couple of practical things. Like one thing that we started doing, so when I was speaking full time, I always wanted to take my girls with me to come to see me speak, but also just like a trip, just one-on-one. And so my wife was like, I don't know, it's got to be the right type of event. They were still pretty young. And so when our oldest was 8, we had the right type of event where I could like stand on stage, but so kind of keep an eye on her loosely, and so brought her with me. I spoke at this event in Florida, and it was awesome. Like the event was fine, but like her and I just hanging out, of like, you get to choose where are we going to eat and what we're going to do, and you're in charge. And we dubbed it the 8 is Great trip. And so then the younger two are like, when's my 8 is Great trip? Like I don't want to wait till I'm 8. Can we get a sooner one? And so we started this when they were 8, and fast forward now, and we still to this day do one-on-one trips with each kid every year, and we rotate years between my wife and I. So even last night, we're recording this at the beginning of a year, we were talking about, okay, you've got a one-on-one with this girl and I've got one-on-ones with these girls, and so what are we going to do? And so talking with the girls of like, what are we going to do? Because it's fun to have travel and experiences as a family, but also to have this thing that like me and just this one are like, this is just our thing. We've all got our thing collectively, but like just you and me, we're gonna go on this cruise, we're gonna go to Disney, or we're gonna go, whatever it may be. It's just like, let them choose. So like, and letting them choose. And like a couple years ago, our middle daughter, she wanted to go to, she was really into dolphins. And so we go to this aquarium in somewhere in Florida. And we went 3 straight nights to Cheesecake Factory. Cheesecake Factory is lovely. I don't mind Cheesecake Factory. Love the bread. But she was just like, can we do Cheesecake Factory again? Like, hey, this is your trip. You want cheesecake? Let's run it back. And so we kept doing Cheesecake Factory, because like just you understand, like as a dad with a wife with kids, you got to be a bit diplomatic of like, okay, well, we just ate that and you want this, but they want this. And so trying to figure out, but like going, no, you're in charge, and whatever you want to do, we're going to do. And if you want to keep doing Cheesecake Factory, all right, sign me up. I'm in for that.
Have you had the Thai lettuce wraps at Cheesecake Factory?
Sheila, my wife, does those
a lot. They're so good.
Yeah.
That's our go-to when we go to Cheesecake Factory. And if I travel somewhere and I just need like a DoorDash or whatever, it's the best thing to DoorDash.
It's
like
really
healthiest
solid.
thing. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
Healthy,
Cheesecake
high protein.
Factory, I got no problem with.
I've never had a bad item of food there. Every single thing I've had there,
they've got thousands of items.
They've got so many items
on their menu.
I've actually thought of it. Every time I go to a Cheesecake Factory, I'm like, I want to interview like either the CEO or like the founder, because I don't know how you can be good at 4,000 menu items.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't make any sense how you can be that good at every single item that you have.
Well done.
Yeah, they do a good job there.
Let me give you one other practical
Please.
thing. Is I started this when they were young. I don't know how this is going to play out, but it started with email. Well, 2 things. I bought their names as domain names for each of them,
That's smart, yeah.
and I'm just squatting on them. I'll sell it back to them someday. I don't think it's over rate. But the other thing was I set up just basic Gmail, just like their name at gmail.com. And I would send them emails like once a month or so, and just like, hey, here's something that happened in life, or hey, here's an interaction we have, or here's something I wanted you to know. And so I started this several years ago, and I was like, someday I'll give them the login to it, and here's these things I've been, writing. And then several years ago, I switched to, instead of doing emails, of doing video. And so I'll record a video, usually once a month, a couple times a year or so. I make it a habit to do it on their birthday to them. It's like, hey, you just turned 8, and how does dad look? Dad looks probably much younger. And so, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this someday in the future, like, I want you to know I'm proud of you. I love you. I'm thinking about you. And so I've recorded like years of these, and someday, we'll give it to them. And so those are like a couple practical little things that you can do, but I also just think like the daily interactions that you have with your kids, and being super intentional about them, of letting them know that you love them, letting them know that you're proud of them. When there are times where like you just want to get out of the house and you just need to be by yourself as a dad, and you're just having a day. But I've been real intentional about, whenever I go run an errand, to always ask one of my girls if they want to go with me.
That's cool, yeah.
Or even if one of them says, hey, can I go with you? To never say no. And in that setting and in that context, you got to say no in other things, but saying no to like, you want to spend time with me? Because there's going to come a day where like you're not going to want to spend time with me, or there's going to come a day where you move out and I really wish we could go back and like we could just run to the store together. And so being intentional with saying like yes to those little moments, I think those are the things that like ultimately make you a good dad.
I have a camping trip with Rosie set up. To go back to your first tip, I have a camping trip, sort of camping. It's like 4 side-by-side cars through the Grand Canyon, like camping around like 8 nights, no phones, coming up here this spring with a bunch of entrepreneurial dads.
That's
and
cool.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever looked forward to a trip as much as I'm looking forward to this one, because Rosie and I have never done a trip together.
Yeah, we've both done a lot of trips, with various groups of people, and like trips are so much fun, getting out of your element, but doing it with just one kid, that's just our time together. It is so much fun, so fulfilling, so rewarding. One other quick note, is I think like one of the best ways that you and I can be good dads is to be good husbands to their moms.
Yeah.
And so I know that like, girls, like, mom's my priority, and I want you girls to know like how lucky we are to have a mom like you have, and loving her and caring for her and talking her up and respecting her and opening the door for her and carrying in the groceries for her and doing the little things that I want my girls to see. Like, man, I know my dad, like, he really likes my mom, and like I want my girls to grow up knowing, like, I have no doubt, like, part of it may be like Sheila and I came from broken homes and both of our parents are divorced. But I never want my girls to question, like, now my dad like really, really likes my mom, like to an obnoxious level.
So what are some of the things you love about your wife?
So when we started dating, when you're 15, you're not thinking through life. You're just thinking like, you're hot. And so that's a win. So, I think that like, as we have grown up together, and been married for almost 22 years. I think like a couple things. One is like, she's an amazing mom. She actually homeschools our girls. Our oldest did kindergarten and first grade in public school. Had a great experience. We talked about doing homeschool, and I was still speaking a lot, doing that thing. And so it was like, hey, if we're gonna do this, like 99% of it's on you. 1%, I'm gonna be the awkward gym teacher that wants to make out with the principal. So ultimately, like, her ownership of that, she's done an amazing job with, like, raising her girls in that way. I think the care, compassion that she has for me, for our family, I think the support that she shows for me, I think as an entrepreneur, having done the speaking thing and the speaker lab and kind of the various entrepreneurial endeavors, even just pitching the idea of moving to Nashville several years ago, like, her level of support and going like, I just believe in you and I know that you can figure it out. And I know, like, as one entrepreneur to another, that like anybody can believe in you, but when your wife believes in you, you're just like, gosh dang, like, we can run through that wall, like, we can accomplish a lot of stuff. And so just the confidence that gives you is massive, so yeah, I feel it's not a great piece of advice to be like, yeah, just meet the love of your life when you're 15 and have no idea, and it, that helps a ton. But that's it's been a massive blessing to me.
Yeah. And some people might say, yeah, you're lucky to have met the person you're supposed to be with, but like, the reality is, it's not like most people don't last that make early because they don't choose to last that long, right? I mean, you've made conscious choices, as she has, to stick through hard times and to work things out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's like, our relationship is no different than anybody else's. We're like, we have a good relationship. We're also super intentional, but there's also times where you're just like, I love you. And I know I signed up to love you, but at this moment, I don't really like you very much. And so, yeah, we have our moments like anybody else. But yeah, I think the intentionality of like, no, we're in this, you know, like there's no other option as far as like, there's no escape hatch or exit door here. Like we're in this to make this work. And there are people who are like, I know of some couples that come to mind who were high school sweethearts and they kind of just grew apart, you know? And I think in many ways, like we grew together. And so the history that we have together and the kind of those shared experiences and relationships that how we built that relationship. But, yeah, I think especially like, even like on the financial side of, it's not like, hey, one of us had money and one of us, like we both kind of grew up in middle-class families. And then, as we've built wealth, like kind of experiencing that together and kind of navigating that together and still saying like, no, but we still, how do we make sure that this doesn't, shape and define who we are? And like, how do we separate our identity from what our bank account says or how many zeros are there? And so I think that has been, super grounding to experience together.
What are some things that you guys do or have done over the years that keeps you connected and so close?
A couple things come to mind. One is we're really intentional on trips together, so just the two of us, and so we take a lot of family vacations.
That on your Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, so
I'm always jealous. I'm like, oh, they're going to Cabo.
Yeah, I mean, at the time of this recording, we're going to Cancun in a couple of weeks. And so really intentional on just one-on-one time on trips, because it takes you out of your norm. If you go do a date, which we're pretty consistent on dates, doing a date once a week. But doing something outside of your norm, going somewhere, just breaking that pattern of just the day in and day out stuff, like that's a big deal. So even, early on when like we were broke and we didn't have anything, like we were talking recently, speaking of Cheesecake Factory, this needs to be a sponsor. They need to
sponsored by Cheesecake Factory.
They need to give some money to Make-A-Wish.
They do.
Make-A-Wish for some cheesecake. But like one of our first trips, I remember we drove to Chicago. We happen to be in Nashville now. It's bitterly cold here. One of the first times we went to Chicago, it's bitterly cold. They have this like Arctic vortex or something, and it was awful. But we were broke. We stayed in this little hotel we found on Hotwire, which I don't even know if that's still a thing anymore.
Yeah, I think it is. I still use it.
It was kind of a sketchy place, but we're like, we're staying in a hotel. We're doing it, And like our splurge was like we went to Cheesecake Factory and we bought a piece of cheesecake and we shared that. We're like, we're rich. We're eating cheesecake in Chicago, and like we still vividly remember that. So trips and experiences I think is super important and valuable. I think another thing that we do is we have a marriage coach that we talk to almost every month and virtually. We've been doing this for a couple years now. We have a really good marriage. I think we would both say that. And I think even there's times where we've hopped on a call with our marriage coach and we're like, I don't know, I'm pretty good. It's not like we've got some major issue or trauma or therapy that we're trying to work through. But having someone that can ask us, kind of be a neutral third party that can ask us questions and things for us to kind of think about and navigate and chew on, I think has been helpful. So I think
I love that. Just
in general, like having an enormous amount, this is true in marriage, but just in life, having an enormous amount of intentionality with your marriage, with your relationship, with your life, and like what kind of life do you want to have? What kind of marriage do you want to have? What kind of business do you want to have? And making sure that you're making decisions that are leading that direction.
Yeah, there's a tendency to want to, and I said this on a podcast recently, but I'll say it again, to only want to bring in help when things are collapsing, right? So like, oh, my business is suffering. Now I better get that consultant.
Yeah. Or
my health is really, really bad. I just had a heart attack. I guess I better hire a personal trainer.
Yeah.
Versus why not do it from the beginning? Like it's like having a pro basketball player, having Shaq back in the day be like, I'm all good. I don't need any help from anybody until I'm out of the NBA. Now I'll ask for help. Like that'd be silly. Yeah. Right. We do that with our marriages. So I love the idea of a marriage coach and just like, hey, let's just make sure we're always good. And we're always attempting to take it to whatever that next level is.
Yep.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, just a specific intentionality around it rather than just kind of, again, going through the motions and coexisting.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so I want to touch on, before we move toward the end, I want to touch a little bit on building the business. Before I get there, though, you have 40-ish employees at this point, so it's a sizable business. You got sizable, I'm sure, income and wealth coming in. How do you manage money today? What do you do? How do you invest it? What do you invest in, if anything? Like, what's that look like, your financial life?
Yeah, really good question. This is something I've learned a lot about and grown a lot in the past couple of years. I remember one thing that, and I've shared this with you, but a talk that you and I, or a conversation you and I had several years ago at a conference was really helpful, where I'd always understood like, well, you got to do something with real estate, and real estate apparently is where it's at. Apparently. And so I remember talking with you, and we were at this conference, and I said, okay, I'm starting to make a little bit of money, and I'm supposed to do something with real estate, apparently. And so I said, there's all these different types of real estate. There's single family homes and multifamily and apartments and Airbnb and raw land and on, commercial, the list goes. And I said, which one is best? And you said, yes. And I was like, that's not helpful. And so what do you mean by that? And you said you can find someone who's killing it with any one of those things. What you don't find is someone who's trying to do all of those things, right? You can find someone who's crushing it with storage units, but they're not trying to do 50 other things.
I think you said that way more eloquently than I probably did.
I don't know. I mean, that's vividly what I remember. I remember the table. I think we were in Dallas, and we were sitting at a table just kind of riffing on this thing, and that's what you said. Well, but that's so true, not just with investing or with money, with life, like you look at guys like us who've had some level of success, and part of it is like we've just been doing the same thing for an extended period of time. Like nobody's looking around like, what's Brandon up to? Is he still doing real estate? Yeah, he's still doing real estate. Is Grant still doing speaking? Still doing speaking. Not for like months, but for like years and decades at this point. Like you and I have both been doing the same thing.
Yeah, there's almost nobody I know who's super successful that hasn't been doing it for 10 years. There's like some magic like 10-year number. I feel like that. You're not you. I mean, it's rare when somebody's like first year $1 million.
Yeah.
Shoot, wow, what a good year! Like that's so rare. And if they say that, they're probably lying or misleading the numbers a little bit because it's easy to manipulate numbers.
So I think as it relates to like as money started coming in and trying to figure out, okay, what do we do this? Like we bought an Airbnb several years ago. You were helpful with and kind of thinking it through. We still own it. In fact, side note, it's like a mile from where we're recording right now.
Nice.
Still have it. It still cash flows. That's the only property we ever bought.
Great.
And so I think initially I was kind of like, okay, you have all these different things that you could invest in. What should I do with these things? And I think oftentimes people think about investing as, how do I maximize this return and how do I get the most possible? And I think the epiphany I've had in the past couple of years was that the best wealth building vehicle is my own business. Mm-hmm. And I happen to be an entrepreneur, and this happens to be what I do. So I can only speak from my own experience. But I remember talking with a friend of mine, another very successful guy, and he said, I was like, how do you invest your money? What do you do with your money? And I'm trying to figure out, do I put it in the market or put it in real estate? What do I do? And he said, how much did your business grow the past couple of years? And I said, well, a couple of years ago, it grew by 70%. And a couple of years ago, it grew by 80%. A couple of years ago, it grew by 50%. This past year, it grew by 31%, And he's like, I don't know of anywhere else
you're gonna need
that you can get that, So I know, like for me, the best use of my focus and attention is not learning how to flip houses. It's not learning how to find the right storage unit, but it is to focus on the business. Now, as cash comes off of that, because a lot of cash comes off of the business, is less about how do I put it in something that is going to, how do I get, 12%, and how do I maximize that for 13%, It's like, no, like put it in like kind of safe long-term stuff. And it's more about, wealth accumulation and wealth preservation than trying to make sure that we're not losing our principle there. So I heard one time that wealth is built through concentration and wealth is kept through diversification. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that now. So there's a lot of syndications I invested in several things with you.
Oh, thanks, man.
And part of it is knowing like, okay, Brandon knows more about real estate and mobile home parks and apartment deals than I'll ever know. So I can try to figure this out on my own and maybe make a couple points more, or I can give it to someone that I just know, like, and trust, and know that like, okay, I trust this guy with my money, and I know eventually he's going to give me more back than what I started with. And like, I'm good with that. So there's several syndications that I'm in and several things that we do, like boring index funds that just sit and hold forever in the market. So that tends to be kind of the way we think about it now.
I love that, man. I spend more time talking to entrepreneurs out of real estate than into it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, the best return on investment is an employee.
Yeah.
Like I'm convinced of that. And by employee, I just like hire someone to grow your business. Because a good employee should pay for themselves 5-10 times over.
Yep.
Like, where are you gonna get that return anywhere else in the world? So if you got $100,000 and you have a need in your business that you could hire that person. You'll make more than $100,000. You make much more if you have the right. I mean, obviously there's caveats to that.
No, in the beginning though, like I think I can at least speak for me, like that was a huge limiting belief, because my assumption was in order to grow a business, you have to hire people, and hiring people is stressful and difficult and messy, and I don't want to manage people and yada, yada, yada. And so I would say, like, if you had told me then, like, hey, can you imagine what it'd be like to have a team with 40, 45 people? I'd be like, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
But yet fast forward, and I would say with a team of 40, 45 people, that my life is better, my stress level is lower, my income is higher, because the adage of like hiring good people, incentivize them well, get out of the way, like there's so much truth to that. And so we have a great team. Like, it doesn't mean that we're perfect by any means. And I certainly have days where it's just like, golly, this is tough. And maybe I just need to be a greeter at Walmart. But for the most part, like, it's just like, this is really fun. I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm making good money, and it's spitting off good money, and I enjoy the people that I'm working with. I know it's making good living for them. And so it's been, from that standpoint, the best investment I can make is just within the business.
Yeah, I think there's a phrase that I say a lot. I don't know where I first heard it, but sometimes the best way out of your business is up. In other words, like, it doesn't mean like to scale back, but it's to scale up. Like, you get a bigger team of better people, and all of a sudden then you can scale yourself out of the business. But a lot of people, it's very similar to like owning one Airbnb or two Airbnbs. It's kind of annoying when you have to deal with one because like, you got to go find the contractor yourself. But if you have 100 Airbnb, it's easier to own 100 Airbnbs than probably it is to own 3.
Yeah.
Because then you're gonna have a full-time maintenance person. You don't have to worry about finding one every single time something breaks. You're gonna have a full-time this, and probably a director that oversees the whole thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes just scale. So you've scaled to a point where you have, I'm sure, like levels, a hierarchy of employees, and they've vetted themselves over time, and they've been found to be good, and the bad ones have left. And so now you actually have more freedom and time. You can go to Cabo, and you can go and enjoy, an afternoon in a freezing 40-degree room.
A little tundra here.
Yeah, a little tundra in the podcast room here. So anyway, I think that's super cool. So let's go to the business then. What is the business? How does it work? How do you make money? And talk about how you built it.
Yeah. So kind of going back to the beginning, when I was a full-time speaker for several years, I got to a point where I was doing 60, 70 gigs a year, really enjoyed it, had a lot of fun with it, had a lot of people asking me like, I want to be a speaker. How do I do that? And quickly realized like speaking is a high-paying manual labor job, and that it's a fun job, but you only get paid whenever you do the thing. And so it's kind of like a surgeon. A surgeon only gets paid whenever they show up and do surgery. And so if you want to take a day off, take several days off, take a week off, whatever, like the faucet turns off. And so started thinking through like, okay, I don't have a business here, I have a job. And so I was trying to think through like all right, what's next? Where do I want to go with this? And so I vividly remember I was speaking in Reno, Nevada, and had a friend that lived nearby, and we met up at Lake Tahoe. Another speaker is probably 20 years older than me, and kind of a mentor, coach figure in my world. And I remember he and I were driving around in his convertible around Lake Tahoe. He'd done well financially. I was like, I want to be like this guy, and what do I need to do here? And this is 10 years ago or so. And I remember we walked out on this dock at the over Lake Tahoe, and he said 2 things that were really helpful for me. He said, one is that you have to regularly find things where the challenge exceeds the skill set, meaning when I first started speaking, I feel like I'm over my head, and I don't know what I'm doing, and like I'm kind of nervous, but like in a good way. And what happens is over time is it flips, and the skill set exceeds the challenge. And so now I can stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people and do a great job, but be on autopilot. And the same thing is true with you. Like the first time you bought a house, you're like, holy crap, I don't know what I'm doing. The challenge exceeds the skill set. And now you can look at some numbers on a house and know within 5 seconds if this is worth it. The skill set starts to exceed the challenge. And so he said, you have to regularly find things where it feels like you're over your head, but in a good way. And so he said that really got my wheels spinning. But the other thing he said, as he said, Grant, like some people are born to be speakers, and like he's one of those guys. Like the guy loves speaking. He will perform his own eulogy. He just absolutely is a phenomenal speaker. But he said, Grant, I think you are an entrepreneur who happens to be good at speaking. And that really clicked for me. That really resonated for me. And so at the time, again, a lot of people were asking me like, I want to be a speaker. How do I do that? It's the same thing I was asking people, how do you find gigs, and what do you speak about, and who hires speakers, and how much do you charge, and like, how does it work? Like speaking for most people is this mysterious black box. And so I did a little bit of coaching around that, did a course on that. And then as that continued to evolve, I was like, there's something here, like nobody's teaching this stuff. And like people want to know how to be speakers. And I think I can teach this. And so continued to lean into that. We did courses initially. And then now we do much more of a mix of group and one-on-one coaching programs. And it's coaching, training programs for people that want to know how to find and book paid speaking engagements. And so whether you're a brand new speaker, just getting started, I don't even know who I'd speak to or what I'd speak about, but I know I like speaking. Or if you're someone who's like, hey, I'm doing several gigs and I'm trying to figure out how do I do better gigs and bigger gigs and higher paid gigs. And like, I want to this is kind of a thing that's becoming more of a business. How do I turn it into a business? And so those are the speakers that we work with and helping them take their message and turn it into an income and make impact with it.
Why'd you switch from courses to kind of a different level of model?
I think a couple of reasons. One was the course world was becoming very saturated. The barrier to entry is very, very low for that. Anybody could spit up a course tomorrow and put it online. So that was part of it, as trying to do something that had a little bit higher barrier to entry. I think the other thing was that people were asking me a lot, like, hey, I want to, can I do coaching? Can I hire you as a coach? And I knew that, like, from a business owner, that is not the best use of my time, one. And two, it's just not super appealing to me. Like, I don't necessarily enjoy coaching. I don't feel like I'm great at it. And so when we the first kind of like group coaching program we had 10 people in it. I did all the sales for it. I did the phone sales for it. I did the coaching for it. I did all the curriculum for it, and knew, like, okay, we've got something here. And then it's a matter of figuring, like, how do I start to work myself out of a job? And so who can we hire that can help with the sales? And can we hire a coach? Can we hire a successful student who's done well that can kind of coach and teach some of the stuff that they're doing, and kind of building off of that. And so, yeah, we don't really do any course stuff today. Everything is sold over the phone. We have a podcast, we have a book, we have some other resources that people can check out, but there's no like one-on-one or coaching things that I particularly do.
So can you walk me a little bit through, and this is partially just for my own, just knowledge as I try to grow the Better Life Tribe. When somebody, like, where do clients come to you? How do they hear about you? And then what does it kind of your funnel look like? Where do people get into your world? How do they get on the phone with you? And what are you selling them on?
Yeah. So a couple things. One is, like, there's a lot of people that are interested in speaking, and we solve a specific problem for a specific audience. Now, I think oftentimes businesses can kind of struggle because they kind of, we help with marketing. And who do we help? We help entrepreneurs. And it's just kind of this vague, squishy, ethereal type of thing. But what do we do is, like, we help people get paid speaking engagements. It's pretty black and white. Either you want to do that or you don't. And if you don't, that's totally fine. But, like, that's what we do. Yeah. And so that's one thing, solving a specific problem for a specific audience.
That was a huge problem, by the way, with Better Life the first year. I mean, we sold 1,000 memberships, and it's been great, and I love it. But it was really, really hard, more than I thought it was, because we weren't targeting any specific type of person. It was anybody. Because anybody can have a better life. I want to help everybody.
Exactly. And that's the danger for speakers, especially early on, because this isn't exclusive to just the company and to entrepreneurs, but it's for speakers, is going solve one specific problem for one specific audience. And so for a speaker who's like, I don't know, man, I just want to help humans, people,
I want to help everyone.
What do I speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? And so for you, it's like, I'm passionate about real estate. And for me, I'm passionate about speaking. But there's a dozen other things that we've talked about that have nothing to do with real estate or speaking that we could try to build something on. And so we become this buffet of, like, I'm for everybody and nobody at the same time. That nobody's excited about going to Golden Corral. You know? But, like, if you're going, like, I'm looking for, like, the best taco place in town, like, cool, go to this place. I'm looking for the best steak. I'm looking for the
Velvet
best barbecue.
Taco is ridiculously
Velvet
good.
Taco is solid.
Yeah,
Where'd you get it? Did you go to
it was
Assembly Hall?
I don't know. It was some DoorDash, but I got what's the brisket?
They have solid tacos.
Dude, the brisket
they have very
taco.
solid tacos. Well done.
Anyway,
I'm proud of you. But one would be, like, solving a specific problem for a specific audience, because then you start to know what you're looking for and where to find those people. So a few things we do, like, we do a lot of ads, like online ads, Facebook ads, and those things can be very, very effective. But you have to understand the economics and the metrics behind them. If we know it costs us X dollars to run an ad, and we know that X number of people are going to see that, and it's going to cost us this much, and it's going to drive to this webinar, and off that webinar, this many people are going to be there, and this many people are going to show up, and you've done that song and dance before, and of that, this many people are going to book a call, and of that, this many people are going to show up, and then, like, you can just run the numbers, and, like, we can spit off a bunch of numbers today, but it's also, like, it's a lot of iteration and testing of this ad, and does that work, and does this webinar work well, and does this sales copy work, and this email for showing up, and, like, there's a lot of pieces that lead to someone actually getting on the phone with a stranger, talking about their speaking hopes and dreams, and eventually potentially investing a significant amount of money. So ads work really well. The podcast, being on other shows, something like this. The other thing that we both touched on here was just doing it for a long time. It's just it's not like we're a fly by night thing, and, like, we've been doing the Speak Lab for 8 years now. We have a lot of success stories, a lot of testimonials, a lot of speakers who've done it, a lot of credibility that we've built in the space, a good reputation of just treating people well. You know, if someone came to you and said, hey, I'm looking for speaking help, there's a decent chance you're going to mention me. Not because I've asked you to, not because there's any affiliate, just because like, as a relationship.
I always
and,
do. I'm always like, go talk to Grant.
And the same way with like real estate. I'm like, my buddy Brandon, like I invest a lot of money with him and he's a good dude and I trust him. And like, there's just that rapport and relationship that doesn't just magically happen.
Which again goes down to when you're serving a specific niche.
Correct.
In a certain type of person. So if somebody was like, hey, do you know anybody who does like good like life help? I'd be like, I know a lot of people, but they're like, I'm looking for somebody who can help me be a paid speaker. I know one guy, like you're the guy.
No, exactly. Like think about for you, you know, listener, viewer of like, what's the thing for you that like, I want to be known as this guy or this girl. Like I'm the go-to person on X topic versus like, I help with everything, you know, like, well, nobody's going to recommend you. Nobody's going to think of you whenever it comes to whatever that thing is that you're doing. And even like with real estate, I know that you know a crap load about real estate, but you also know a lot niching down about like mobile home parks. Now, again, you know a lot about a lot of different things related to real estate, but mobile home parks has become something in the past few years that, you know, you've become known for and kind of a stake in the flat or a stake in the ground for like, no, I'm this guy. So even like within a topic of like, what's that niche that you can really command?
Yeah, that's really good, man. Yeah, the Better Life Tribe, we are taking a hard pivot this year, going back to real estate. Because I wanted to be everything. I wanted to help everybody. And it just, instead, it's like we help real estate, like current active real estate investors get financial freedom. Now, all of a sudden, it's a lot easier. People are like, who's going to help you get to financial freedom if you're already an investor? Oh, we are. We're the community of real estate investors. And then all of a sudden it becomes way easier to tell people.
Because people can self-identify. Okay, so when you say, hey, do you want to live a better life? I'm going like, yeah, I want to live a better life, but I'm also not looking to sign up for just another
you're not going
thing.
to pay $300 a month to be part of my club.
But if you're going like, I'm looking for like people who are active real estate investors, like, okay, I can self-select and know that I'm not an active real estate investor. It doesn't, like that makes your job easier because people can self-select and go like, oh, active real estate, like that's what I'm looking for. That's me. Like, tell me more about that. And it makes it so much simpler. There was a buddy of mine who does a webinar, and he was talking about this idea, and he said he went to a car shop, like an O'Reilly's or something, and he was looking for something to clean his car and detail his car. And he shows a picture of all these different types of cleaners and washes and waxes. And then he points to this one, and he said, this one's for black cars. That's the only difference. It's probably the same solution and the same material that's in all the others, but this one's for black. And he had a black car, and he's like, bingo, that's the one I want. Because it's like, that's for me, even though all these others could work. You know, better life for everybody could work, but like, no, that, tell me more, but that's what I'm looking for. That self-selection makes it much simpler.
Oh, amazing. And that's so good advice for every business owner out there, even every real estate investor out there. Just like, you don't have to be good at everything. Like, in fact, the power is in being good at a very small number of things. So.
Absolutely. And the same thing is like, now fast forward as a CEO and a business owner, I know that like the best thing I can do is to not do the sales calls and to not do the webinar and to not try to do the coaching calls and the things that you recognize, like you can't be great at everything. And so again, this is also like you and I, like we have a desire to be CEOs and entrepreneurs and kind of build something. And so there's nothing wrong with also just being a solopreneur and just like, I just want to do my own thing and I don't want to deal with people. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So don't hear what we're not saying. But also recognizing like what's your skill set, where do you best add value to within the business, and then looking for other people that can contribute to those things that you're not necessarily great at. And again, this is advice that we've all heard thousands of times, but also like I'm here to say there's a lot of truth to it, and it's super effective and it works.
Amazing. All right, man. Well, we got to slowly start to wrap this up. I got a few more segments left in the show, so let's get to them next. The first is the 3-2-1 pivot. So the idea of a pivot being your life's going one direction, and then it changes a little bit, maybe 1 degree, maybe 90 degrees, maybe 180. So we're going to talk about 3 books that have been pivot books, 2 people that have changed the direction of your life, pivot people, and 1 pivot quote. So let's start with the books. What are 3 books that have changed the direction of your life a little bit? Yeah,
one that comes to mind was a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love by Dan Miller. Okay. And this was something that whenever I left the gig as a youth pastor, and then I'm just in this season of wandering the desert trying to figure out what's next, that was a really, really impactful book. And Dan is someone who actually at the time of this recording, like within the past couple of weeks, found out he has stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Oh, dang.
And like literally just, like weeks left to live. Wow. And so Dan's, when I read that book 20 years ago or so, had a huge impact on my life. Since then, Dan's become a great friend. And to see a guy who's like, lived a phenomenal life and is just on the doorstep of just the finish line of life, and still have so much joy in his life and exuberance, and like just who he is as a human being is like really, really powerful. So that book, for the season of life that I was in at the time of trying to figure out what do I want to do, what am I good at, what do I enjoy doing, what's that Venn diagram where all those things come together, like that book was super, super helpful. Another book that comes to mind, I'm sure a lot of people mention, is 4 Hour Work Week. Of when you start kind of thinking about like what are the online business opportunities that exist, and how would this turn into a business or a career, or what would this even look like? And when you start thinking about the early days of internet and blogging and social media and content, and how does this turn into a business? And that was an impactful book, kind of thinking about like expanding your mind of what's possible. So that was a powerful one. I'm trying to think of another one that comes to mind. One that I read recently that I thought was really good was 10X is Easier Than 2X.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, with Ben Hardy, Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. I thought that was really was very, very good, just very timely, of helping me to kind of think bigger of kind of like what's possible. I'll give one. This is a book you recommended to me, a book called Vivid Vision. Oh, yeah. We talked about this I think I've shared this with you maybe 5-6 years ago or so. Like business was growing, things were going well. Just trying to think through like, okay, where are we going? Like this is already bigger than I expected. What do we do now? And you told me about that book. You shared with me at the time you had the for Open Door Capital, the newspaper article, and sent that to me. And that was super inspiring. Of just like, okay, we can do this. And so we created our first one.
That's awesome.
And that finished in December 31st, 2021. And then created another one that runs through the end of this year. So in 3-year increments, kind of thinking through, writing out in present tense, what do you want life to look like? And this is in the context of business, but this could be for marriage or life, whatever you want it to be. And so that was a really impactful, helpful one of just thinking through like, everybody's going to end up somewhere, but like, how do you personally, professionally, whatever it is you're trying to do, like in there on purpose. And so Vivid Vision was another real good one.
I love all those suggestions. All right. What about people? 2 people that have pivoted your life.
Okay, I'm going to go back to something that I mentioned at the beginning that was impactful. And I don't even know who this person is, but I know that they were a speaker. And so I was a youth pastor and been doing this for a little while. I felt really stressed out. I felt, just kind of questioning, what do I want to be when I grow up? Is this it? And so I attended a youth pastor conference. I was a youth pastor in Missouri, happened to attend a youth pastor conference that happened to be in Nashville, which is where I live now, which is where we're recording this. And I remember sitting in this session, kind of running through my mind, is this what I want to do? Is this not what I want to do? Not really sure what's next. And I remember that the guy, again, I don't even remember the speaker. I don't remember what he said, but I remember he said something to the effect of, if you don't enjoy at least 80% of what you're doing, you need to find something else. Wow. And I remember just feeling this epiphany. And again, a throwaway line he wouldn't even remember saying. Yeah. And I vividly remember walking out in the hall and calling my wife and just saying like, I think we need to leave. And I don't know what's next. And I don't know what happens now. And I know you're pregnant and we'll figure it out, and hang in there. Just trust me, And that had a huge impact on my life. And like leaving that to then wander the desert to figure out like speaking is the path that I wanted to take. And again, it was a speaker I don't even remember. I don't even remember their name. It could have been you.
It might have been me, man.
I wouldn't have a clue. Like, why is Brandon speaking at this youth pastor conference? But
I was a youth pastor. You know that?
Were you?
I was.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, 10 years. I didn't know you were either. I mean, I was never ordained, so I was a youth volunteer leader, but I was the guy at church for 10 years.
Yeah, we could compare some more stories on that.
I'm sure we could.
Yeah. So that one was definitely like, it had a profound impact, and like eventually leading to, and it was just a line that a random speaker said. And another one I would say, one that comes to mind is this mentor I've referenced that is here in town, a guy by the name of Aaron Walker. And Aaron is again, he's probably in his mid-60s or so, very successful in business. And he's just the kind of guy, like he's a good old Southern boy, born and raised in Nashville. He will not take any crap from you whatsoever. And I remember the first couple times doing lunch with him, and like he's really calling me out on some stuff and holding me accountable. And I remember I listen to a lot of podcasts. I consume a lot of podcasts while I'm driving, especially driving here, listening to a podcast the whole time. And I remember the first or second time I had lunch with him, and he just said some things to me that then I'd just take a 30-minute drive home, sitting in silence. It's just like, Whew. All right. That was a lot. I just got to absorb this and soak this in. And so he's a guy that I know, like, I tell him all the time, like, I want to be like you when I grow up. And he's a guy that is a good father. He's a good husband, been married for 40 plus years. He's got 2 grown daughters who still like him and like to be around him. He's done well in business. And so, he's a guy that's just had a profound impact in my life. And I just like, I want to learn from you and I just want to be around you. We don't talk a ton of business strategy or X's and O's, but just like, I want to be the kind of human that you are. What do I need to do there?
Beautiful. What about a pivot quote?
A quote I say a lot, we talk a lot about internally with our team, is that who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. You and I, we enjoy entrepreneurship, we enjoy business, we enjoy investing and wealth building and talking about these things. We enjoy podcasting. We enjoy doing all these things, speaking. Like, all these things are well and good, but our most important roles are being a good husband and being a good father. And so if we are great at the craft and the skills of these other things, but we drop the ball at home with the people that matter most to us, like, we're doing it wrong. And so there's nothing wrong with being driven and motivated and having a desire to build and grow and scale and yada, yada, yada. There's nothing wrong with those things. But I don't ever want to do that at the detriment of my family. And like, those girls are the people that matter most to me. And so, I'm a very motivated, driven person. I want to be successful, whatever that looks like. But I want people to be like, man, Grant really likes his girls. Like, he really likes his wife. He really likes his daughters. You mentioned, like, I see you guys taking trips all the time. It's like, that's way more important to me than like, here's a bunch of speaking things that you could learn, or entrepreneur things. Like, talking about like family stuff and how do we be good dads and be good husbands. Like, that's the most important stuff we can talk about here.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, who you are is more important than what you do.
I want to go way back real quick to a point we talked about earlier. Let's say I'm giving a speech and I have that line and I know I want to deliver that line. Like, that's a line I want to deliver. How do you work backward? Let's say that's the line. Who you are is more important than what you do. That a line I want to deliver. How do you lead into that? Like, where would you come up with a story for that? I'm just curious how your brain would put that together.
Yeah. And I don't even know if that's a quote I heard somewhere or something I came up with. I know it's just a quote I've used for years and years and years. And so I don't even know who to ascribe credit to. But I think that you could talk about maybe a time where you made the wrong decision and like you focus on the business or your career path more than, because that's also the type of thing people can relate to. They're just like
an empty victory and you got it.
Yeah, dang, I did it, but at what cost? You know, something that you can associate with that. Who you are is more important than what you do is also like, it's a quotable line, a way to think about this. Like, if you saw this in a tweet, is this the type of thing that you're like, ooh, that's good. I'll remember that. It's portable. I can remember that. It's memorable.
Another thing Hormozy does really well. Alex Hormozy has 1,000 of these lines. I think he works just on these perfect little lines. Yeah,
because there's 100 ways you could say that and get the same idea across. But really thinking through, like, what's the best way to communicate this in the fewest number of words that could be something that's memorable. So it could be a story about that. It could be a story just about your being a husband, being a father. You and I could both you would really enjoy this, but like, we could start telling stories and all of a sudden, like, you and I are just choking up, tearing up, just talking about our wife and kids, and people are just like, dang it, like, I love my wife and I love my kids, because like, that's the stuff that ultimately like really freaking matters, So I think stories that just, again, kind of humanize it, personalize it, things that people can relate to.
Go ahead.
This is off topic slightly, but also like going back to the story thing, you mentioned, we've talked about a lot of stuff here. And we talked about like, people will remember the stories that we talked about here, right? And so you and your daughter were in a bathroom and everyone right now can fill in the blank of what happened in the story, right? Because stories, that happened an hour ago, and days from now, people will still remember what happened in that bathroom, the look that you guys gave each other, and like that, the importance and the power of utilizing stories.
Yeah. And if I had a good like one-line zinger, one of those things like, about the mirror, then they would remember that lesson. Hopefully they remember the story and they remember the lesson. That's why I'm waiting for that moment. There was a random story I read years ago. I was a history major in college. And so I like history, but I follow a bunch of Instagram accounts of like history facts and stuff. Right. And then I save them. I have like a save bookmark thing on my Instagram. I have hundreds of stories. Anyway, one of my favorite ones was back in 11, 12, 11, 13, something like that. In Erfurt, Germany, there was like this like feuding, like different families got together and they met at this this monastery, and they had a peace treaty signed.
Yeah.
And after the signing, they all decided to just dance, and so they're dancing and just enjoying their time here. And then the floor broke, and like 60 or 70 nobles fell to their death into a latrine pit, and they all died. And I read this story and I was like, that's the greatest story ever. I'm going to someday use it. This is like 6 years ago. I probably read that story, and I've been keeping it until my last book. I was able to put it in there. And I was like, so what, if you're dancing over a weak foundation, you're going to fall in a pit of your own, poo. And I ended up being a line. So I ended up getting in there. So,
well done.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that's the type of thing that like, well, let me give you a couple thoughts on that. One is like, having something like, I don't know where I'm going to use it, but there's something there, you know? The other thing that I think is, again, this is personal preference, but I always lean toward like first person stories.
Yes.
Because you can tell, like, let me tell you about something that happened in the 1300s, or let me tell you about, recently I read this, study from Harvard and and you're just kind of like, yeah, that's something,
cool. Yep.
but also like, all right, I went to the bathroom and there's another dad in there and here's what happened. Like everyone's just like, I've been in that bathroom. I know what you're talking about. I took my kid in the bathroom and they did something disgusting, and like I can relate to that. And there's just like the human connection to that. So again, tell the story of just this happened, in history, or here's the study or research report that I read. Like tell those by all means, but also like look for those first person stories, because as humans speaking to collections of other humans, like that's what we connect with.
Yeah. Do you think that changes more for books versus speaking than like on stage? Like, I feel like I'd be more inclined to tell the personal story on stage and less inclined in a book, and vice versa. I'd be more inclined to tell more of an anecdote in a book, but I don't know.
I think it kind of depends on the person. So there are people that are, they're great in a book, but they're not great on stage, and vice versa. And it doesn't always translate. There are people that like you read their book and like someone you're familiar with, and like I can hear them writing this, and so there's some stories that are written that just don't translate as well, and so it's kind of like the way this person tells it, or how animated they get, or the gestures that they use, or them kind of visually painting this picture of it. Like it wouldn't be as powerful in a book, but it doesn't mean it's not effective.
Yeah. All right. Next segment is called Past, Present, Future. So first question is, what's your advice to your younger self? If you go back and mentor your younger self for a day.
I would tell my younger self to just chill out and enjoy the journey. Because I think I remember early on, and even today, you're just kind of like, man, I'm working hard. Is this all going to be okay? Am I going to make it? I don't even know what make it means. But I think there's just so much pressure and stress just thinking about the road ahead. Our oldest daughter is 17 and she'll be 18 in a couple months. And I can see the heaviness on her, of just thinking about, should I go to college? What should I do? What should I study? What do I want to do? There's this path or that path. And, on one hand, like as a grown man several decades later, you're like, it doesn't matter. You're going to be fine, And like, on the other hand, telling a 17-year-old, like, it doesn't matter. Nothing you do right now matters in 20 years. You're like, well, that's not helpful. And so I think like, hey, it's okay. Like enjoy the journey, and things will work. Like put in the work, do the right things, the things that you're supposed to do. Like be a person of character and integrity. Like make good decisions, and like things tend to work out well.
One of my favorite quotes is, "It's often more important that you decide than what you decide."
Yeah,
and I love that concept of, especially for young people, like it doesn't really matter if you're like, hey, I think I'm going to go to law school. Okay, go study for law school. And if you're halfway through it and you're like, that doesn't really the thing. Fine, quit it and go do something else. Like, it's like, who cares? Like, but if you just wander in unsuredness and like wander around, just kind of figure out what the next step is, you don't know, so you take no action. Like that's the most dangerous thing of all, is just to do nothing.
Well, let's go back to the real estate example. Remember when I came to you of just going like, I've got money. What should I do with it? Should I invest in real estate? And to quickly realize, and we even, like I said, we bought an Airbnb, and then quickly realized like, actually, like this isn't the best. I see how this could totally work, and this would totally make sense. But making the decision that the best use of investing in real estate is not through my own vehicle, but through somebody else's, and just making that decision, like it just simplifies things. Is what you do.
In fact, when you and I talked a year and a half ago or whatever it was in Maui about me being a speaker, and I'm like, I don't want to be a speaker, and you're like, well, it was such a relief. That was one of the more like the pivotal conversations in my life. In that. I was like, all of a sudden I wasn't feeling guilty for not speaking. I just felt like I should be speaking, because that's what people in my position do. Podcasters go out and do speaking gigs. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait, I don't have to anymore. Now that has shifted a little bit, in that I still am speaking for my own things, if nothing else, right? So recently Alex here and I have been chatting about this. Is like, if I'm speaking anyway, I might as well get good at it. So I'm like going to be working on hiring a coach and getting a keynote down. So at least I have one speech or two that I have in my back pocket. Because if I'm doing it anyway, occasionally, I might as well do a good job at it.
Which, if I remember correctly, that was another thing we talked about was you were constantly working
Always
on
doing
new
new ones
talks.
every time.
Yeah, it's like, dude, what are you doing?
And a lot
like,
of
you're
that's just
making
because I was
way
bored.
too harder.
Yeah, I was just bored. So I was like, I don't want to talk about that again. I'll talk about a new thing.
But you make it way more difficult for
Way
yourself.
more difficult.
Versus like, here's a talk that, like, if you go see a comedian or something, you want to see like, I want to see your best stuff.
Yeah, they've perfected it.
I don't want you to like test material and like, it's kind of funny, but like, I was kind of hoping you were going to be funnier or better than this. I want your best material.
Oh, all right. Next question about your present. I like the word game changer, like oh, this has been a total game changer. So what is like a habit, action, could be an app, could be a book, could be anything that's been a game changer in your life in the past year?
Trying to think of something that is really relatable. So one thing the thing that comes to mind, we could try to like make this tactical as best as possible, is just relationships and being around the type of people that you want to become. And so when you and I first connected, again, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, you and I were both like, we were doing fine, but fast forward 10 years, we're doing finer. But at the time, it's just kind of like, okay, here's a guy I want to build a relationship with and connect with, and someone who he's going somewhere and I want to be around, and like looking for those people that are similar, of like you're kind of coming up with, and again, you and I came up in two different spaces, but there's also the connection of like, we're both dads, we're both husbands, we're both Christ followers, we're both interested in business, and these several different commonalities that have just kind of kept us intertwined over the years. So I would say like being really, really intentional about who are people who are, I heard it described one time as like, mentors and peers. And so like mentors, like this guy that I mentioned, Aaron Walker, like someone who's 20 years older, who's like, I just want to be like you. So how do I get access to you and just hang out with you and learn from you, And then also like people who are alongside of you, of like, we're both figuring this out together, but we can talk speaking, we can talk parenting, we can talk life and compare notes from time to time. We've talked some speaking, we've talked some Airbnb stuff over the years. We've helped each other. And it's not like this tit for tat or we're going to keep record or anything. It's just like, no, if you need something on speaking, like let me know. And there's not like, I'm going to point you to a program or a book or research. No, like we're friends and I want to help out. And I know you feel the same with like real estate and investing advice. And so I think just the prioritizing the importance of relationships, of just constantly having your, again, kind of radar up, not even like a transactional thing of like, okay, I think I can gain something from that person, so how do I get in with them? No, like just being intentional of building relationships with people that you can help each other on the journey.
Awesome, man. Third question here about your future. What do you want your legacy to be? And I'll frame that within the idea of, you pass away someday, your family and friends are standing around your casket and they're saying, Grant was what? Like, what do you want to be known as?
Yeah, we've definitely touched on this, but I think like the importance of just like, man, like Grant really loved his family, like he loved his wife, he loved his daughters. And like he did some business things, I think, but like he really, really, really loved his girls. So I know you and I are both a part of a group called Front Row Dads. And, their tagline in there is family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. And I think that's just such a pivotal switch of like so often it's, we talk about, our entrepreneurial or career or professional endeavors, accomplishments, achievements, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, I have some, a wife and some kids that sort of know me. It's like, no, like that sucks. Like don't do it that way. Like, so I hope someday that people are like, man, that guy, he accomplished a couple things, but like he really was a very intentional, good, not perfect, but good dad, good husband, and like really loved his girls.
Awesome. All right, the wrap up, final two questions. First, what are you excited for? What's coming up in your life and business?
One thing we didn't talk about, flying.
Oh, that's right. Pilot. Yeah, that's exciting.
I feel like being a pilot, all right, so I'm a new pilot, which feels like being a vegan CrossFitter where you're like, you got to incorporate it in the conversation. Like, did I mention I'm a pilot? Yeah. Okay. So here's how this started was, I've traveled around a lot. You and I have both been on a lot of planes, and I've always just kind of been like, what's it like up there? Like, what are they doing up there? Like, how are we doing this? And so a couple years ago, I was at our team retreat and our CFO had just started taking flying lessons. I was like, you just started taking flying lessons? Like, how's that work? What are you teaching? What are you doing up there? And so literally after that, I was like, that's kind of intriguing. And so I signed up for flying lessons, and almost a year ago, I got my pilot's license. And so then did that for a couple months, and then started talking about like, should we buy a plane? Like, what would that mean? And so we actually bought a plane like 6 months ago or so.
That's cool.
And so it has been a huge win personally, professionally. I've used it to like fly around, to go meet up with people, see people, go to lunch meetings that historically like wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah.
There's a guy I met recently in the Charlotte area, and I was like, can I just fly out to you and we have lunch? And like we flew out, we hung out for several hours, and then I flew home, made it home for dinner. It was awesome. It was such a great day. But also just like experiences with my wife, with my girls. Like we've flown a lot of places, taken people, like taken friends up. A lot of people haven't had the experience of like sitting up in a front seat of a plane. Yeah. And if you've never been in a small one, there's equal controls on both sides. So like taking a friend up and letting them fly a plane, and letting people do that and just being like, no, you're not going to crash. Cool. I'm not, but most people are like, they'll text me, weeks, days, months later, and like, I can't believe I got to fly a plane, So it's one thing if we're like, hey, remember that time we went to Starbucks, and just sat and talked? There's another thing like, remember that time we went flying? Yeah. So flying has just been it's just a random thing. It's kind of been like a bucket list thing. I don't have any desire to go to an airline or anything. It's just a fun thing. Like, it's kind of cool. I could, like, you and I could go get in a plane right now. We'll go fly around the Nashville area. And like, that's a thing. That's pretty fun.
We should have done the podcast in the air.
We totally should. Let's do it.
There is a guy, Bill Allen, right? Does
Bill
a podcast in the air?
Yep. Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's a local guy. So I know
right,
Bill.
Yeah.
Yep.
Funny. All right, last question. Where should people best connect with you and learn from the Speaker Lab?
Yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com. So if you listen to this podcast, you probably listen to others. So the Speaker Lab podcast, we've got nearly 500 episodes. So we're coming up there on the milestone. We got the book, The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform, a variety of free and paid tools over at the Speaker Lab. But yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com.
Beautiful. All right, man. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Good to see you, buddy.